Not all characters are created equal. Some have full backstories, motivation, purpose, and thematic relevance to the work. They are so integral to the core of it that without them, it's hard to imagine having a compelling narrative at all. We generally call those the main characters. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the no-names. Characters so irrelevant they don't really exist. Maybe they show up in the background once or twice, get a line it if that, then are just disposed of or just never show up again. They come and go like waves at the shore of a beach. Always present, sure, but never leaving an impression. Does that make sense? But what about the characters in the middle? That do have significant screen time, but not so much that you couldn't easily rewrite the narrative to exclude them. How many of these non-essential characters should we include in a story? The obvious answer is as few as possible, right? But when Tite Kubo, author of Bleach, was working on the antagonist group for the arc After Soul Society, he had settled on making hollows based on the 7 deadly sins. He even had made some already. Arellano based on greed, Baragon based on pride, Slazeporo based on lust. But as he was working on it, he soon realized he needed more characters to fill this mythical gap between the major and the minor nobody characters. And so, the 7 deadly sins became the 10 swords, the Espada. And some of those characters ended up being fan favorites, of course. Greenjaw being a prime example, despite the fact that Kubo originally wanted to kill him after his very first raid on Karakura Town. But not all those characters were winners in the eyes of the consumer. A common criticism of Bleach to this day is that it has too many characters after all. Why do we need 13 royal squads? Why, 10 espadas? Why do we have the entire alphabet for the Quincy? Come on, does anybody care about Kira, Hisagi? Yes. All of those are remarkably popular. But that's besides the point. This video is about one of the many losers in the eyes of the public, trying to survive in that line between main character and nobody. The curious case of the one who is, in my opinion, the worst Espada by a long shot. Zumari Rudiax. First of all, that's the first and last time I say his full name. He's just Zumari from now on. And second of all, yeah, nice fake out. You thought it was going to be Yami, but people know Yami. People understand their problems with Yami. Yami is always in people's minds. He was introduced alongside Ukiura, who is easily one of the best received and most popular Espada, if not the most popular Espada. Yami is very much memorable, even though he's deeply unpopular. Zumari, on the other hand, is much closer to what I was looking for. Because he's a nobody, he hardly has any screen time at all. He shows up, appears in a couple color pages, fights, then dies. Most, if not all of his characters contained in this one fight. He doesn't get any characterization before it, and he doesn't get any post-mortem characterization either, beyond getting his aspect of death revealed by Baragon during the fake Karakura Town. And that's it really. There's not a lot going on with him, there's not a lot to even hate about him. And to me, something being boring is much worse than something being enraging or mad. If it's making you angry, uneasy, now that's compelling. At least, I think so. Much rather be a -10 than a 0, as they say. Much rather be ashes than dust. But still. But back on topic. He is, without a doubt, the closest to being a nobody in the Espada, aside from maybe Stark. But even he gets more group dynamics and characterization, both via his interaction with his fractions and his interactions with the other Espada, which again, Zumari just doesn't have. So what the hell? Kubo made 10 Espada because he had too many ideas for just 7? But here is one Espada that, for all intents and purposes, does nothing the whole story, fights once and then dies. What exactly is the deal with that? What idea is he trying to connect with this guy? Couldn't he just simply make 9 Espada instead? Well, there is something I neglected to mention. There are characters that are very insignificant to the overall plot of the story, introduced at the beginning parts and then killed off there as well. But they serve an important function. They are microcosms of the ideas, themes, concepts of a work, and they serve to reinforce or pay off something in a smaller scale in preparation for a big payoff. And while I think Zumari is easily the worst Espada on the individual sense, that doesn't make him a bad or worthless character, or his inclusion arbitrary or meaningless. His existence strengthens all the other Espada and lays the foundation for not only great moments in this arc, but in future ones as well. So let's stop beating around the bush and talk about the only time Zumari came even close to mattering at all: his fight with Byakuya. Now, this may sound like a weird thing to say at the start of the analysis, but Byakuya works really hard to make white his own color. And by that I mean one simple thing. Due to Hollows having white masks and regular Shinigami having black robes, there is a strong association of Shinigami and black with duty and white with desires and Hollows. And that is of course reflected in our protagonist Ichigo, whose Soul Reaper powers are literally jet black, and his Hollow powers make him pure white. But in the context of Byakuya, his main characteristic is pride, not desire. And as such, his main color came to represent that when it came to him. The character of white on his name does not represent the white desire of Hollows, but simply his pride. And I need to get that out now, because as soon as the fight starts, it becomes clear it's going to be a battle between two people with huge prides, though in different things. Because Zumari becomes extremely prideful of his Sonido and compares himself to Byakuya. Byakuya then rebukes him, saying that they are not the same, they are not on the same level, which is of course ironic. The image of Byakuya Kuchiki, a member of a literal royal family who saw himself as the one who should uphold the standards of morality in Soul Society, calling anybody else arrogant, should seem absurd. But it's weirdly fitting because it's an attempt to reframe Zumari to not only piggyback off the characterization of other Hollows, but also of Byakuya's very own characterization. And this is relevant because Zumari doesn't have a lot of character traits. We already, met most of them, if not all of them. He's proud and thinks Soul Reapers as a whole are arrogant. And that's it. And that's not very interesting on its own, but it is very relevant to Byakuya. And so, the real reason for the existence of this character becomes much easier to discern. Zumari does not have an interesting journey to tell, or an interesting story or moral to uphold, or deny, or to be crushed by, or to be consumed with. He is here to be a microcosm for the ideal Espada, and by being that, a foil to Byakuya, who many readers still think of as the ideal Soul Reaper. After all, that was his defining characteristic the last time we were faced with him in the Soul Society arc. Pride in Soul Society and his duty. And so they fight. Zumari releases after Byakuya once again inserts that they are not the same level, despite one being a captain and the other an Espada. Groups Kubo himself has described as foils to one another, then reveals that he prides himself in dominion, in the strong dominating the weak, the sun dominating the moon. Of course, echoing Aizen's dominion of Wakamundo and his own powers, to control and attain dominion over the bodies of his opponents. Just as Aizen makes the Espada do his bidding without lifting so much as a finger. Byakuya rejects this and cuts himself immediately. And he's an interesting bit of characterization, of course, as if he couldn't stand the thought of a Hollow having control over his body. But regardless, once Rukia gets control, the fight escalates very quickly. We find out that Zumari's ability, Amor, is very similar to that of a Soul Reaper Skido, once again making both sides' statements deeply ironic, both calling each other hypocrites and inferior when their attacks are literally extremely similar in many ways. But anyway, Byakuya moves in for a killing blow, saying that his control doesn't matter anymore, where he before respected it enough to instantly attack his own arms and legs. The reason for this pompous change of attitude becomes clear very quickly. Zumari accuses the Soul Reapers as a whole of being arrogant, who view themselves as gods and sole arbiters of truth, making any slaughter of hollows justice. These words should resonate, after all. A big plot point of the manga is the genocide the Soul Society committed against the Quincy, literally for their different views of justice and some good amount of prejudice as well. But as a show of growth, Byakuya doesn't even attempt to defend society's actions, both past and present, but instead claims that he isn't attacking as a Soul Reaper at all. And as Byakuya himself also puts it, he's only attacking because Zumari aimed a blade at his pride. This type of response to the evils of Soul Society is actually a trend with Soul Reapers who are consistently portrayed in a positive light, Renji and Rukia being prime examples of this, Renji declaring himself a villain in Thousand Year Blood War, and both of them running away to Huecomundo to follow Ichigo despite the orders of the Captain Commander, ultimately dragging the captains to Huecomundo with them. And of course, all of that is a result of Ichigo's actions, forcing them to move, forcing them to change and grow. Because Byakuya, or at least the Byakuya of society, had no answer to Zumari's question. He literally has no justification to offer for the society anymore, because he knows what he values, the vows he's made, the vows to his late wife, and he will uphold them, all else be damned. Of course, reflecting things that Ichigo said to him, and setting up Byakuya to remind Ichigo of those very words after he comes back with his fight with Byakuya, though doing so would ultimately doom Ichigo to self-sacrifice in the final Getsuga Tensho, even if it wasn't Byakuya's intention. But wasn't this video supposed to be about Zumari? Why the hell am I mostly talking about Byakuya? Why do we go wrong? Well, nowhere really, because Zumari is a microcosm of the Espada, the ideal member of them if you will, and has very little of distinctive personality to himself beyond that. He's proud, he fights with Byakuya because they're both proud, and he loves Aizen like most lower hollows, and that's about it. That's why I said he's the least interesting Espada to me, since he only exists to enrich the Espada by association by establishing a deadline. Because, for example, his fight is just before Noitoras and Vazeporo, both of which are some of the most eccentric out there Espada, so having a baseline lore right before them is actually pretty good. And he also plays into Byakuya's characteristics just enough he can demonstrate Byakuya's character development from Soul Society and set up future payoffs. He is very much a character that doesn't exist for something to tell an interesting story of himself, but exists to facilitate others telling something, to facilitate other characters, other moments, other people's fights, other people's histories. Of course, that's fine. If your antagonists aren't making your protagonist change and progress via a fight, then something is wrong with your battle shonen, right? But maybe Zumari is a case where Kubo kinda skipped out on the whole personality bit. He's a bit too clean, too utilitarian, too bare bones. Characters like Haribel, despite only having marginally more screen time, are much more well realized, have a lot more dimensions to them. And I'm not talking about implied dimensions or analysis, just on a basic level, they're just more compelling. So, you know, if I had to give it a rating from 1 to 10, I would ironically give him a 7. But, armed with all of this knowledge, all of this analysis we just did on Zumari, I think it's possible for us to realize why Kubo decided to go from 7 to 10 Espada after all. Sometimes the best way to show progress in a journey isn't an inner monologue or a simple, decisive action, but a fight. And if you're having Byakuya fight in Huecomundo going after, you know, Rukia, then you also probably gotta bring Kenpachi. He also has a big relationship to Ichigo. Well, then if you bring Kenpachi, well, then he also has to fight and deepen him, right? You're not gonna have Kenpachi show up and not fight anybody. Well, and so falls the dominoes. You also probably bring in somebody that can operate the Garganta, so is my Yuri, and then probably a healer, I don't know, some guy from Squad 4, maybe Unohana herself, if it's relevant. And so you ended up with 3 Espada being separated to fight 3 captains. They go in Huecomundo, their own foils, or as if they were made specifically to be used for this moment so that they could have fights where all the fighters are parallels of one another. Scientist versus scientist, blood beast versus blood beast, prideful versus prideful. But still, that's 3 of your Espada dedicated to side characters fighting, and then you have Arorieno who was dedicated to Rukia fighting. That's already 4 out of the original 7 Espada dedicated to, well, side character fights. Adding that Grimjaw and Ukiura who are going to fight Ichigo and are part of his personal journey in this arc, that brings the total up to 6. That means you only have 1 Espada going to fake Karakura Town with Aizen, Tosen, and Gin. And that doesn't sound right. Well, you could cut some side character fights, I guess. Or you could bite the bullet and just make more characters. Because if you're not going to cut off the side character fights, then it becomes really hard to justify not making more characters. Because it's simply too difficult to make 1 character that plays off half a dozen characters. It's much easier to make other 6 characters and have each one play off their pair. If you want a character to play off of Hitsugaya, then you make a character that's the opposite of him in many ways. Instead of being a small boy, it's a big girl. Instead of Soul Reaper, Hollow. Captain, Espada. Instead of using cold ice, she uses hot water. And you have them fight. If you're going to have a fight with Kyoraku, then you create a guy who's just like him. Lazy, and has a relationship with a girl that is younger than him. And then you have that play off in the way the fight ends up happening. And tie into their characters. Etc. so on and so forth. It simply makes more sense as a writer to write groups with multiple pieces so it becomes easier to partition side character content. There is a reason why Meruman's Royal Guard in Hunter x Hunter, for example, is not just one dude. There is a reason why the Akatsuki works in pairs, because not only the entire story of Naruto is about pairs, symbols, yin and yang, but it also makes it much easier to write a dynamic, because now you don't have to write 1 character that plays off a lot of the cast. You can write 2 characters that play off each other and have that dynamic carry it. Makes it much more compact and compelling for the reader as well. So really, there are no downsides to making more Espada aside from the fact that it would inevitably make the arc way longer, since you're going to have to pay off all this that you set up. But then again, Kubo also had made at that point 13 squads, and he would spend a lot of time just paying that off, cashing in on all the characters he introduced way back in Soul Society. So he was there for the long haul, for a good while, so it's fine. And so, based on all of that, I think it's very, very clear to see that in the production process, Kubo just bit the bullet and named the group of villains that was going to succeed the Soul Reapers after the most Western character in the Japanese numeral alphabet, Ju, which is the character for 10, and called his new group the 10 Espada, and just came up with a few more of them. This group was made first and foremost to foil the Soul Reapers, even if not all those foils are hits, and therefore it becomes a little bit hard to see where they are coming from sometimes. But still, to be clear, Zumari is, in my view, the absolute rock bottom. It's all hits from here, mostly. But coming back to the chart from the beginning, where will we put him? Towards the irrelevant side for sure, right? He is a character that is just hyped enough by being an Espada and one rank below Grimjaw to be a threatening presence alongside furthering other characters, even if he himself was kinda dry. Some might even say that he was a character who got the job done, so to speak. In the business of battle shonen manga, even more so Weekly Shonen Jump battle shonen manga, I like to call these types of characters jobbers. Especially if they die after their first real fight. And make no mistake, this may not have been a very flattering look at him, but I like Zumari. He is kind of the silver standard for an inoffensive, effective jobber character that still helps further the narrative of the character he's fighting in a short period of time. All that's stopping him from being the gold standard is that he doesn't have anything very interesting personally. He has no short-term interesting conflict to accompany him. Put that and he becomes the perfect jobber. He is just shy of great. And, I'm happy to say that just shy of great is the worst rating for the Espada in my opinion. Anyway, sorry for no great conclusive statement. Just kind of lukewarm. That's kind of the whole tone of this video as well. Still, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Support the channel any way you can. And see you next time.